Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Ithaca Reader's Briefing, the podcast that transforms an entire issue of a major magazine into a focused, engaging audio experience of 30 to 60 minutes. Today we're bringing you a reader's guide to the June 29, 2026 issue of The New Yorker. This week's cover, Landscape Portrait, by Tom Gauld. It begins with a wonderfully simple scene. A young traveler stands before an enormous painted landscape, phone held high, trying to capture the view. But what is inside the frame is not really alive. It looks like nature, yet it is artificial. If we look a little closer, the image would open onto a much bigger question. In a world where almost every experience is framed, photographed, shared, and retold, how do we know what is real and where we belong within it? That question echoes throughout this issue, as the New Yorker moves from the fading promise of the American dream and the pressures of automobile debt to stories of grief, faith, identity, and a rapidly changing New York. Together, these pieces explore how people make sense of lives and landscapes that never stop shifting beneath their feet. First, the American dream once promised a better, richer, and happier life for citizens of every rank. But in an age of mounting debt, unaffordable housing, and constant anxiety about financial stability, can people still believe in upward mobility? Second, when a person loses access to a car, what else begins to unravel? How are work, medical appointments, shopping, childcare, and even credit affected, all at the same time? Third, how does sudden bereavement transform a person's income, memory, physical health, and ability to raise a child? And can eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, better known as EMDR, help someone continue living after devastating loss? Fourth, when faith, patriotism, campus organizations, and social media become deeply intertwined, how does the political identity of young people begin to change? And fifth, how do sports, animal sexuality, literature, film, music, and the rhythms of everyday life in New York reshape our understanding of identity, bodily boundaries, and what it means to live together? So, with those themes in mind, let's now begin our article-by-article briefing of this issue.
Section 1. Income debt and social mobility. 1.1. Better, richer, happier. In 1931, James Truslow Adams described the American dream as a social order in which citizens of every rank could live better, richer, and happier lives, without being limited by the accidents of birth or position. Post-war expansion gave working people affordable homes, higher education, and routes into middle-class stability. Among Americans born in 1940, 92% were likely to earn more than their parents. Yet those opportunities were never equal, and slavery, housing discrimination, employment discrimination, and banking discrimination remained central to the story. For people born around 1980, the chance of earning more than their parents fell to about one-half. By 2024, 47% of Americans no longer believe that hard work and determination would fulfill the promise. Young people wanted a debt-free life and a minimum of stability. Once golden pipes, success stories, street barricades, and the distant White House were placed beside one another, the question remained: who tells the American dream, who gets inside, and who waits outside? Students were still looking for a horizon worth pursuing, and no one had given up. 1.2. Hot pursuit. In many parts of the country, work, food, church, and medical appointments depend on personal transportation. Matthew Pittman saw the repossession agent as the face that appeared when the financial system reached a family driveway. Drivers were paid only after a vehicle was successfully taken, usually about $350, while the costs of trucks, insurance, fuel, and training kept rising. That structure pushed them to keep searching for recoverable metal and increased hurried decisions and confrontation. Repossession agents had been shot, stabbed, struck by vehicles, and beaten with tools. At least 7 were killed in 2023. Cameras, license plate readers, and national databases also turned addresses, times, locations, and historical movements into data that could be stored and sold. One 22-year-old woman carried an automobile loan at about 19% while paying for college and working several jobs. When the car was taken, her work and her credit were both damaged. Industry representatives said that automobile finance would stop without repossession. Reformers called for common standards in defensive driving, situational awareness, and de-escalation. Pittman finally said that he had spent 4 decades like a bulldog chained to the end of the industrial line, helping finance companies make more money.
Section 2. Public Trust, Youth and Health. 2.1. Around a Dark Corner. After her husband died following 2 catastrophic seizures, Amanda Petrusich left the emergency room carrying their 13-month-old daughter. The mathematics of death could not be solved. Household income was cut in half, domestic responsibilities doubled, and she became a single mother facing endlessly renewed administrative work, insomnia, broken memory, and paralysis before the smallest decisions. Grief was not only an emotional event. The closest relationships affect the immune system, the cardiovascular system, sleep, eating, and perhaps the whole body. During the 3 months after the death of a spouse, the surviving partner's risk of death may rise by an additional 66%. 6 weeks after her husband's death, Petrusich asked about eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Her doctor reminded her that she was not post anything. Grieving was still an active verb. The treatment combined conversation, exposure, and alternating bilateral stimulation. She held a vibrating paddle in each hand, repeatedly narrated the death, and added a positive belief such as "I survived." After 3 or 4 sessions, grief no longer felt like a predator waiting around a dark corner. It was still there, but its contours had become visible. Research suggested that the treatment might reduce the vividness and emotional intensity of traumatic memories, although its mechanism remained uncertain. Near the first anniversary, music became listenable again. Solo parenthood found a rhythm, and the future first became interesting and then almost exciting. Her therapist kept reminding her to grieve because a bad thing had happened and feeling bad was reasonable. To feel better, she had to value and nurture grief as an invisible but necessary system inside the body. 2.2. Wild Things. Sexual reproduction carries an obvious cost, yet science still has no single explanation for it. Mating types, unequal gametes, sex change, hermaphroditism, coercive mating, and same-sex behavior in at least 1,500 species reveal combinations far beyond the human imagination. Animals have sex not only to reproduce but also to build social bonds, exchange benefits, ease conflict, or experience pleasure. Natural history makes it difficult to claim that a behavior never occurs in nature, but nature still cannot decide what society ought to accept. 2.3. Young Americans. 16-year-old Gracie Bell Joyce cared for animals in an exotic pet store and treated every task as a chance to evangelize. Charlie Kirk turned universities into testing grounds. His "Prove Me Wrong" debates, memorable lines, and social media clips gave young conservatives arguments they could imitate. In 2024, his organization reported $85 million in revenue and presented the presidential election as a spiritual battle against evil. The pandemic became a turning point. Closed campuses and restrictions on worship pushed Kirk toward churches, and he described education, entertainment, media, religion, family, business, and government as 7 spheres that believers should control. The high school program Club America emphasized flags, the Pledge of Allegiance, patriotism, and civil discussion. The organization claimed 3,600 chapters, although not all were formally recognized by schools. Lunchtime debates in Palm Beach schools covered health care, guns, abortion, and immigration. Few students spoke, many watched, and one student said that people enjoyed the spectacle as if they were watching a video. By the end of the spring, some students still admired Kirk, but had moved away from an organization that spoke less about free speech and more about supporting the president. Joyce remained at the pet store, praying, cleaning, checking that 300 chicks were alive and moving, and then continuing forward. 2.4. Sport and Spectacle. The Knicks championship lit up New York and returned bread and circuses to public discussion. Juvenal had warned that food and entertainment could keep people from noticing a government changing from democracy into dictatorship. Between civic celebrations, a cage fighting event was staged on the White House South Lawn, while World Cup athletes crossed increasingly suspicious borders. The article therefore asked whether people were being distracted by oligarchs and by the circuses they encouraged. Violence also hovered at the edge of beloved games. Basketball, football, and hockey had become more physical, while concussions and the deaths of athletes could be covered by record revenues. The White House cage fight was not the same as a city gathering around a shared pleasure. One concerned authoritarian cynicism, the other civic commonality. Haiti's return to the World Cup after 50 years also showed that identity depends less on geography than on self-perception. Sports can be a distraction, a distortion, or, on rare occasions, a distillation of a city and a community that everyone can share. Whether watching or playing, the counsel to pray for a healthy body, a healthy mind, and inward serenity remained sound. Section 3. Bodies, Borders, and Narrative Risk. 3.1. Instancing. Isabel J. Kim's sublimation leaves an original person behind at a border and creates an instance who enters another country. A good passport, a career, and wealth determine mobility, while the border divides body, memory, and future into separate paths. 3.2. Longing for Ithaca. Christopher Nolan's adaptation of the Odyssey must do more than film storms, monsters, and homecoming. It must confront slavery, violence, and bodily experience. Odysseus is hard, cruel, and grief-stricken, yet he accepts death and remains determined to reclaim his home. 3.3. The Readers. Aortic surgery brings the fear of being read, understood, and refused into a therapeutic relationship. The therapist does not take the magazine because the telling must continue. Reading does not end. It becomes distance again. 3.4. Briefly noted. 4 books enter the daily intimacies of slavery, the abuse of a teenage runner, the consequences of adolescent neglect, and a supernatural mystery inside a family of artists. 3.5. On form. Sunrise, Roman roads, self-healing concrete, and the Chalk Hill blue butterfly are placed together. Form connects faith, nature, labor, and repair. The more people know, the more they know that the world is a miracle. 3.6. Domesticity. 6 owls call through a fall spring as if they were inside the house. The daffodils are nearly blown away and snow is coming. What remains is desire, and the people do act on it.
Section 4. Urban Literature and Cultural Memory.
For point 1. Urban Legend.
Colson Whitehead moves from elevators and the Underground Railroad to Harlem crime. New York changes too quickly. Precision permits invention, and fiction lets people continue living before destruction arrives. 4.2. Growing Pains. Olivia Rodrigo's third album explores love, jealousy, and growing older in the early 20s. She moves away from pop punk and refuses to make girls responsible for a culture that sexualizes their bodies. 4.3. Prickly Pears. The Invite confines 2 couples inside a San Francisco apartment. Thin walls, mirrors, sex, and professional failure force them to say what they have long avoided. The ending restores monogamy but lacks courage.
Section 5. Weekly Arts and Short Forms. 5.1. Knicksomania. The Knicks won their first championship in 53 years, but the parade collided with state examinations, millions of spectators, police checkpoints, and closed stores. Public joy rewrote school, commuting, and the ordinary life of the city. 5.2. Marcel. Marcel places Breuer's brutalism, Sotheby's auctions, custom glassware, unremarkable dishes, and enormous desserts in one room. The restaurant knows the value of everything and the price as well. 5.3. The Pied Piper. This modern fable turns child abduction into a satire of parenting. McDonald's sleep deprivation and mental fog make the townspeople forget the rats, yet gladly pay more to hire the piper as their regular babysitter. 5.4. Boogie-Woogie Time. Alexandra Grant paints the rule of law as straight lines and real juicy life as a mess of paint. Crisis contains possibility. People make culture by gathering together and overcome the power that makes them feel powerless. 5.5. Goings On. The guide for June 24 through June 30 moves from Lucintha Childs, Tortoise and a Dance Festival to Saint Laurent Photography, musicals and a Saudi mystery film, linking experiment, longing, and injustice. 5.6. Animated. Dan Mintz turns stand-up into animation, allowing every blink and cough to be revised. Animation reduces the risk of live failure, but the funniest portrait can also be insulting, and a human performer still faces danger on stage. 5.7. Pick 3. Russian once humbled the learner, and Italian returns through an old textbook, La Camera and Jhumpa Lahiri's Roman Stories. Seduction is what makes us lose our way. All right, we are now ready to enter today's main program. Before we do, please like, save, and share this episode so that other people who need it can also see today's content and become better versions of themselves. Thank you. You can now use the timeline in the video description or the pinned comment to find the articles that interest you and listen to them in depth.